All right. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar on MOOCs and Dialogue, a great pairing. I'm Dr. Kevin Martin, and I am your host for today's discussion. We're delighted to have you with us as we explore the intersections between MOOCs, which stands for Massive Open Online Courses, and the power of dialogue in education. At the Digital Education Futures Initiative, or DEFI, based at Hughes Hall, the University of Cambridge, our mission is to foster a more inclusive global education system. And we believe that digital technology can open up new possibilities for learning, making it more accessible and dialogue-driven. Through our research, we aim to explore how digital tools can support innovative teaching practices and collaborative learning experiences, particularly in online environments like MOOCs. So I'm very excited to be hosting today's discussion as we explore this topic deeper. Today's webinar will focus on the 4 key components of the MOOC acronym: Massive, Open, Online, and Course, but each through a different lens. We'll hear from our 3 incredible panelists, each bringing unique insights into how dialogue can shape and enrich the MOOC experience. Each section of today's webinar will cover one letter of the acronym, offering a deeper dive into its significance and evolution. I encourage you as the audience to participate by asking questions, and you can submit questions at any time using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll address as many of those as we possibly can. So once again, thank you for joining us today, and now I will pass it on to Meaghan, who will introduce herself, and then the other panelists will introduce themselves, and then Fereshte will take us forward and give a brief overview of MOOCs, and then launch into our first section, Massive. So Meaghan, over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Can I just double check you can see my screen here? Good. Sorry, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Perfect. Okay, just double checking. So as by way of a brief introduction, I just wanted to share a little bit of the context on which I'll be drawing from. So I recently passed my PhD Viva actually, and so I'll be talking through the research that I did for that. So in terms of background, one thing that I really looked at was, it's very clear that educational dialogue is a really strong pedagogical tool, and TPD is needed to develop educational dialogue in practice. And so how can we leverage technology to support this, to support teacher professional development and encourage a more dialogic approach? And there's a lot of gaps in the evidence around how to do that effectively and meaningfully, in particular in ways online that are dialogic, impactful, and inclusive as well. Inclusivity is something that we'll talk about when we talk about the open part of MOOCs. So there's many potential affordances of MOOCs and a lot of continued challenges. We'll go back to these, and these slides will be available for you afterwards if you're interested. But basically, to explore this, we developed 3 different mechanical MOOCs. They're a sort of new form of MOOC, if you will. And so there are 3 different courses, all related to supporting teachers to use a more dialogic approach in their practice. And there's links in the slideshow as well to bring you to the courses. 2 of them are still hosted on GitHub, so they're openly accessible. And so this is what we use to really test this out. And so I'll be drawing on the findings from this specific research. And there are these screenshots of what the course actually looked like in process. So I'll leave it there. And then, like I said, I'll go back to these things when we talk about the different components. So over to Farah to introduce herself.
So can I just check that everybody can see my screen? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so hi everybody. So just to follow on from what Meaghan was saying, I'm Farah Ahmed, and I've been involved in dialogic education for a long time and worked with Meaghan on some of the MOOCs that she was talking about. But also the context that I will be speaking from is a domain of CAMTRI. CAMTRI is the Cambridge Teacher Research Exchange, if those of you are not familiar with it. And this domain is called the Islamic Educator Learning Community. And effectively, this part of the research that I've been doing in my most recent study, and I have some specific MOOC related questions around what ways can traditional Islamic dialogic practices be integrated with educational dialogue, and what is the capacity for practitioner professional development in asynchronous dialogue across global North and global South, which I think is a little bit of a different context. And then similar to Meaghan, what are the affordances and limitations of the kind of MOOCs that we're using? I'm not going to go too much through my data, but what I kind of wanted to just sort of give people a feel for is that this the participants of these MOOCs are from international. They're coming from very different backgrounds, very different types of their own education as educators, and very different types of data collection that went on to. And so there's part of the challenges that we will sort of like explore a bit later is around when something is so open, the complexities of understanding what exactly is going on and how to address that in designing MOOCs. So I'm going to leave it there and pass it on to Fereshte.
Thanks very much, Farah. If you stop sharing, then I'll be able to share.
I'm trying to stop, so just give me a second. Oh, I can't seem to. Yeah, somebody can. Thank you.
Perfect. Just bear with me for a second. And oops. Hello, everyone, and very welcome to this webinar. I am Fereshte Goshtasbpour, a lecturer in digital education based at the Institute of Educational Technology at the Open University. 5 years ago, I did my PhD on MOOCs when MOOCs were quite popular, and since then, I've been actively working and researching on MOOCs. And for the past 5 years, my research mainly involved using MOOCs for teachers' professional development, especially at higher education level and in Global South. I'm also a steering committee member of the Future Learn academic network, and as you know, Future Learn is the only UK-based MOOC provider, and my research also quite largely focus on Future Learn MOOCs. To start the session today, I would like to give you a little bit of background about MOOCs, Massive Open Online Courses, and the history of these courses and the narrative, and where we are with them now. So back in 2012, MOOCs, which was called the Year of MOOC because of an article in New York Times, MOOCs were defined as online courses that are designed for a large number of learners or participants that can be accessed by anyone, anywhere, as long as they have internet connection, and there is no prerequisite to join these courses, and these courses will give or offer a full kind of course experience without any fee to students, without any fee. And that was mainly the definition that was used. And they were at the beginning truly massive because they didn't have any enrollment limits. For example, the British Council MOOC on Future Learn in one of the first run had only 440,000 learners from all around the globe, and that's literally very massive. So they have this feature of scalability and capacity to serve large number of learners. They were open, and the openness in literature refers to different aspects. For example, openness can be considered as open access, that it is open to everyone for free. The educational model is open education, so there is no physical or temporal barrier to learners' participation. Open scheduling of the courses. The courses are there. You can learn anytime you want or engage with them anytime you want at your own pace. It can take a learner 2 weeks to finish a 5-week MOOC. For someone, it may take 6 months. So the scheduling is open, and the learning objectives are also open and people can personalize. I may just want to join a week of MOOC or a step of MOOC to learn something and then get out of that MOOC and not complete it. So openness can interpret it in that way. And then the second O refers to online, and originally, and still to some extent now, they are delivered online via internet, and they are courses because they've got content that are underpinned by pedagogy. At the beginning, this pedagogical model was connectivist. Then little by little, it moved to constructivist, social constructivist, and then a hybrid of different pedagogies. I deliberately put these definitions because through the examples and case studies, we're going to go through each component of MOOC and see, are in 2024 they still MOOC or not? I was looking at Google Trends to see the search history of MOOCs. And since 2012, you can see that there was a surge in around 2013, and then little by little, people's interest globally in searching about MOOCs declined. And again, you see another hype in the middle around 2019, and that's where COVID caused a lot of attention again to MOOCs. Since then, the attention level has dropped and plateaued, but still there is interest in MOOCs, and we can definitely say they haven't died. There is also, we can look at also at the history of MOOCs through the articles and news pieces that were written about MOOCs. And again, you can see a kind of 2012, 2013, a lot of people and journalists and scholars being interested in them. So you see a sharp increase, and that increase is there because MOOC in 2014-13, because MOOCs are known as a global phenomena, and then 2014, 15, 16, there is a drop because the novelty effects fade away. It didn't really revolutionize education, although it adds some diversity and created some interesting models and learning pathways, but it wasn't what everyone expected. 2017, companies and platforms started looking at the business models, trying to different partnership models, different fee models, and then little by little interest counted in terms of journal articles and also news pieces increased a little bit and then plateaued, and that's where we are with MOOCs. And we want to see why is that and what has happened to MOOCs. So in 2012, the promise of MOOCs was basically removing all the barriers to education and making education free and accessible for everyone, or basically democratizing education. They mainly did it by giving free access and just requiring payment for certification. MOOCs were mostly used for informal learning, and prestigious universities in 2012 really got engaged, like MIT and Harvard, got really engaged with making their professors, their knowledgeable experts and resources available to everyone for free. During the past decades or 10, 12 years, what happened, the MOOC providers, the platform providers increased the offering, but experimenting with different business models because this free wasn't really working, and creating and maintaining a MOOCs cost them quite a lot of money. That's why they started looking at partnership and see if they can bring money from other spaces. They also tested different pedagogical approaches because the dropout rate, as most of you may know, were very high, and learner engagement was quite low. They looked at platform providers looked at different technological advancement to see if they can address this issue. And again, they started looking at new forms of MOOCs, and accreditation and credential, and probably bringing money engagement through a different mechanism. So now in 2024, where we are with MOOCs, they are not really free, or they are free for a certain period of time. For example, today I received an email from FutureLearn that my access to a course that I'm doing, or a MOOC, will expire in 7 days, while previously I could have kind of lifelong access until the course basically retires, what the expression we use. And now I have the option that I can either own the course and buy it, or buy a subscription to course, and that's the business model I'm talking about. They are mostly used for blended learning and lifelong learning and professional learning. And this professional learning and kind of blended learning has got a reason, because platforms are moving to advertising their courses and offering their courses in a different way. I was looking at FutureLearn, and the first thing that a person goes to their website is get access to 1,400 courses and develop your industry most valuable skills. So it's about industry and skills. Coursera is saying gain the latest skills, again about skills. edX says build new skills, advance your career. So it's the platforms that are also shifting this focus to professional learning and workplace learning. And Kennedy and Lolillard, who are one of two main scholars in the area of MOOC from UCL, in their most recent book said that MOOC is still a solution for mainly professionals rather than students. And that's probably why they didn't really revolutionize education. I'm going to wrap up here by just saying that throughout the this panel discussion, I will be relying on 3 case studies from 3 different teacher professional development projects, all in Global South, and all involving MOOCs. The first one, ZEST, or Zambian Education School-Based Training, happened for 6 or 7 years, involved 8 MOOCs. The nationwide capacity development for higher education staff in Kenya involved 2 MOOCs, and capacity building of teachers in science in Myanmar at college level was another project that involved 2 MOOCs. But you will be surprised how MOOCs were used and in these projects. I'm going to stop here and hand over to Kevin for the rest of the session.
Thank you, Fereshte, for introducing us to the massive element of MOOCs. And I will continue us with a question for Meaghan, and then we can start a dialogue between you. But Meaghan, I was curious about your the impact of the massive component for the MOOCs that you have designed. And what are some of the unique challenges and opportunities that come with designing a course at such large scale, especially when it comes to fostering meaningful dialogue amongst participants?
Yeah, those are really good questions. So just to start off with more information about the context of our courses, they were quite small. The biggest one we had was the one that Farah and I did together. And we had probably about a few hundred active participants, low retention rates for that one in particular, really high retention rates for my other trials, which had less people, which was sort of interesting. But the massive component, I thought one thing that I wanted to talk about was the sort of capacity for MOOCs to be massive, not only within the course themselves, but the structure of it, in our case, really focused on models of local facilitation. And so what I mean by that is that it invited local facilitators who were teachers who were interested in supporting their colleagues developing their dialogic approaches. It was a space for them to come together, make a facilitation plan, bring that back to their local settings, and work with their colleagues. And so that type of scaling can be massive, but not online. So it's quite difficult for us to sort of monitor as researchers. And so that was a bit challenging, but I thought that that was a really interesting sort of model that we toyed with. And that did stem from research done by the Toolkit for Systematic Educational Data Analysis for recognizing the importance of the role of the facilitator in teacher professional development and in leading their colleagues through conducting reflective inquiries into their dialogic teaching practices. And so that was the component that of Massive that I reflected on, I think, in my own research. And also related to that, the mechanical MOOC structure. So I just sort of briefly introduced this at the beginning. It conceptualized MOOCs in a slightly different way, which was as almost a community hub for learning. The mechanical part of it is meant to test whether or not you can create sort of functionality using technology to have ongoing courses and activities, but that these internal learning networks are formed for, depending on maybe for teachers, it could be their subjects that they teach, where they're located, and then they split up and then they determine where they go from there. They can contextualize the resources more, they can reflect together through specific activities. And so that was another thing around Massive that I reflected on through my own research. So I'll stop there, but yeah. I don't know if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I wanted to just add something and relate it back to what Fereshte was saying about MOOCs becoming not dumbed down, maybe just the focus shifting from sort of some deep kind of education to skills. And the MOOC that Meaghan's talking about that we did together, where we had quite a large number of participants, we did struggle with retention, but that was much more, it was a deeper kind of learning. It was around various philosophies of educational dialogue or thinkers and their theories of educational dialogue and how those might impact education. So it wasn't so much skills-based as more knowledge-based. And what came out of that, which was quite interesting, is that the people who did stay on in it, they engaged in some very deep dialogue. And it was very deep dialogue across international contexts, which then continued post the course. And some of the people have had a little bit of research background, others didn't, but there is now a network, a collaboration of people who've emerged from that first running of the course, who are continuing the dialogue beyond the course and doing that at quite a deep level. So I think that is an interesting point, that MOOCs do have the capacity to do that kind of deeper education, even if that is not how they are being commonly used right now.
I have a follow-up question that relates to Massive and will transition us into open. But when you have that kind of hybrid environment where you have both the MOOC-based, for lack of a better word, classroom time, but then much of the actual learning experience is happening away from that classroom time amongst the groups that are interacting. Do you have ways of assessing the quality or the impact of those types of dialogues?
Yeah, we actually, I mean, a number of the courses that I've designed or co-designed with Meaghan involve some sort of reflective exercises. So the way that we evaluate how people are interacting with the learning materials and whether they are whether there's any kind of changes in their classroom practice, because remember, this is for educators, is by two things. So one is these reflective accounts that they have to do weekly over a 6-week period, and then they kind of turn that into some sort of reflective report. So it's like a journal and a report. And then the second way of evaluating is to actually look at the quality of the contributions they make on the discussion forum, because we require them to make at least 2 contributions a week, and at least one of those contributions needs to be in response to something that somebody else has said. So those are the kind of techniques that we use to do some evaluation, which is actually fairly time intensive. So if it then becomes less of a mechanical open online course and more of whoever's facilitating or running the courses engaging quite deeply with what the people who are participating in the courses are actually doing.
Yeah, I was just going to exactly piggyback on that and say it required a level of flexibility from us as well, in a bit of ad hoc planning, adjusting things where needed. And that was the part of our design. We wanted it to be flexible. But yeah, looking at, is this possible without intensive facilitator support? Not for our courses, would be my response to that. But yeah, Fereshte, I don't know if you want to jump in.
I just have a quick point about massiveness, and this massiveness recently has started puzzling me because for ZEST project, we reach 47 zones and 5 districts. So if we want to count the number of learners, there were 4,900 teachers. And then when we moved to the Kenyan project, when we had 2 MOOCs, the massiveness is we covered all public universities in Kenya, and the number of learners were 300. Then for TIDE project, which was in Myanmar, we had engaged all art and science colleges in Myanmar and had 650. So I started thinking, do we have, because in the definition of MOOCs, massiveness is defined as serving the large number of students or learners or participants. So in some, like in Myanmar, 650 is not big, it's not massive in MOOC terminology, but then it's also the reach, because we have representative from all those 46 colleges in Myanmar, and I started thinking, what really massiveness in MOOCs mean? Is it the reach of MOOC, or is still number of participants a good indicator, even if the participant just enrolls, reads 1 sentence and drops out? Do we consider that? And that's something that I've been thinking for quite a while, especially when it comes to look at the impact of MOOCs.
And each of you has described different contexts that you have deployed MOOCs in, and that is indicative of MOOC. It's not just massive, it's also open. That's a key characteristic of these platforms. But it also raises questions about quality and credibility of the content. So maybe, Fereshte, you can start and lead us into this area of open, but how do you ensure that an open access course maintains rigorous academic standards when it's meant to be open to such a large audience?
Look, in order to create a MOOC, we've got the platform provider side and we have the academic side. So although the course is hosted on FutureLearn, but it's us at Open University or you at Cambridge who are academic and look at or design the content and produce the content. You just give it to edX, Coursera, etc. to offer it and to deliver it. And it still goes mostly, if they are provided by a university, which 75–80%, they are still provided by universities or academic institution, and much fewer courses through other types of partnership. There is quality control, so there is no doubt about the quality of what is offering. However, pitching it to a level that is understandable for someone who doesn't have any clue about the topic, as well as someone who comes to the course with an expert knowledge, that is one of the difficulties of designing MOOCs. And that's why some platforms started having a basic level and then have additional resources, additional readings to help other catch up with the gap, or if they'd like to know. But going back to the topic of openness, this is something that I want to bring up and see what others think. For all the 3 case studies that I told you, one of them was open from day 1. So anyone could join it for the Zambian project. However, because it was very contextualized to Zambian context, Zimbabwean context, it was very context specific. And for example, for someone from Middle East, it wasn't that helpful. But the two other courses for the first 3 years, they were open for certain population, and the reason was because of funding, and because we got international funding, the funder wants to have a proper evaluation and the rest. So that made me question. I call them semi-open because for a certain period of time they were open, although they were open, for example, to all lectures in Kenya, but it was limited to all lectures in Kenya. And after the project end, it was like completely open and everyone could get even free digital badges and certificates. So I think the more we move forward, this openness becomes kind of semi-open. And even the email I got today, I used to have access. I've got MOOCs from my PhD that there is a disclaimer that says this course has retired, so we don't guarantee the accuracy of information. However, I still can access, download, type in the discussion area. But with a MOOC that I started 3 weeks ago, basically in 7 days, my access is gonna be removed. And that's where you can see business models are talking much stronger than academic, pedagogic, and other values that we are most probably after. I'll stop here and let Meaghan and Farah jump in.
And before they jump in, I want to remind our audience that you can ask questions of any of the panelists in the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, so please do so. Meaghan, it looked like you were about to talk.
Oh yeah, no, I really agree with everything you said, Fereshte. It's a really solid summary, but I will say that I had a very interesting experiment in terms of not using a traditional MOOC provider for these courses. So there is something called Course in a Box that was developed by the folks at Peer-to-Peer University. And it's basically just a framework. I don't know if anyone participating in this webinar is familiar with GitHub, but you can sort of fork a repository on GitHub, and you don't need a lot of coding experience or skill in this area, and essentially create your own MOOC. And you can, there's some limitations, of course, but that's what we used for all 3 of those courses. Oh, thank you for putting that link in. So it is really interesting, and it was very easy to use, and it addressed some of those things around openness. First of all, no one has to sign up to access any of the materials. It's open, which created some challenges in terms of us monitoring usage. I had to do sort of heat maps and website analytics a different way, and that didn't deliver, that kind of, that level of detail in the data, but the goal was for it to be open. And also, just to go back to something fresh you mentioned around having sort of that ladder of support available for participants, that's one thing that we utilized as well. So we wanted to have a really streamlined, very navigable course, but that you could access more support where needed, depending on your level of experience with educational dialogue, also your level of experience and digital literacy with, using online courses for your professional development. There were sort of user guides and extra support for that as well. And so when it comes to openness, interestingly, I did a thematic sort of inquiry into this in terms of how accessible and equitable is that aspect of, online teacher professional development. And I used a framework, a conceptual framework by Warshauer, and it's featured in the slides that will be shared, but essentially it breaks it down into physical resources, social resources, and what's the other one? Let me look. And human resources. And so the physical resources would be, challenges regarding connectivity, reliable access to devices, electricity. The human resources would be that digital literacy I mentioned, the varied levels of familiarity with the content itself, self-motivation, time management skills. And the social resources were the ones I think mentioned the most. Farah, I'm sure you'll agree with me on this, that around resources regarding instructional support from the facilitators, but most importantly, the ability to connect with and reflect with and, learn from and with other cohort peers, other practitioners from around the world. That was the biggest draw. The question was, could everyone equally or equitably participate in those dialogues? And the answer was not really. There were a lot of barriers to that. So yeah, I'll leave it there. Farah, I'll pass it over to you in terms of adding in from your perspective.
I'm fine. I think that was you said quite a lot there. So just I don't really have anything to add to that.
Well, then let's move to online, and I think this will be a interesting and challenging discussion because you have presented many contexts where online is a challenge. And so how do you, maybe Fereshte, I see you smiling and nodding your head. Why don't you start? How do you navigate those types of limitations when you are working in a context where online isn't a given?
Yeah, that I was smiling because in Zest project in Zambia, there was no internet, and the power, the electricity was not reliable. So computer laptops, they weren't really a good option, and we really have problem with the online part. And that's where technology came into place, and we used battery-powered devices or small computers, which are called Raspberry Pis, and we ordered them for the project. They act as a hub, and it's like a flash memory. People can get connected to it and get the material and get the content. And because it is battery-powered, so not having electricity wasn't a problem. And don't forget, for that project, we had 8 MOOCs. And then people have wraparound kind of discussions, and all well done, to be honest, offline. I can't even call it asynchronous online because it wasn't online. And I'm thinking in low-resourced areas, really that we have to put a question mark when it comes to that online. Another example is with the project in Kenya. That project happened during COVID, and the Ministry of Education basically asked us to train teachers so they can offer their classes online. And we put as a prerequisite that people need to have access to internet and, a tablet or a device. And everyone signed, we have access, but in reality, the internet was so unreliable, and also it was very, very expensive, and people had to pay themselves for the data bundles. So what we ended up doing, the online content was there, but we also had downloadable material in 37 different formats. And what they did, one person download the content, and through WhatsApp, they send it to their colleagues in that university, and different universities did that, and they only later went online to do the quiz in order to get the badge and certificate. And again, that made me wonder, do we need another name or acronym for MOOC? Because the online bits, again, is not always online, especially in low-resourced kind of context. I don't know the experience of others about this.
Yeah, I can jump in a little bit there. Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I found was the necessity of having all, sort of everything to be downloadable, including any videos. But the other aspect of it that I found interesting, and Farah, jump in on this too, was the difference in terms of, and this sort of, I see Gonzalo had posted a question here around using chatbots to mediate between participants, and the concern around, does that reduce the level of, educational dialogue happening within the course? Because, a central tenet for teacher professional development is to utilize the pedagogy you seek to impart. And so is it still dialogic if you bring in some of these features? And there was a real difference in terms of the dialogue taking place asynchronously on the discussion forum, and that taking place synchronously in, for example, live events that we would host. And I think both were useful and impactful, but in just different ways. And so that was a really interesting thing to look at. And I think that there's some of that in terms of looking at, okay, does this online component give us new forms of dialogue? In some ways, yes, I think it does. And there are interesting there's interesting functionality out there, like Perusal was a really interesting tool for dialogue where you could pause a video and in that paused screenshot actually write something and somebody could comment. And then I thought, okay, that's new. That, you know what I mean? Let's look at that and what impact that can really have. And so in terms of thinking it through the online piece, that also came up. So we should also mention that in terms of for our courses, we didn't specifically target low resource contexts. We just looked at that sort of after the fact as, like I said, a thematic inquiry. And we noticed that it was largely like inaccessible for, you know, for that component. But yeah, for us, it was more so around what we looked at for the online bit was around the dialogic piece. Farah, I don't know if you have thoughts on that in terms of the difference between the discussion forum and other forums.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think one of the things that comes out from the online space is that it becomes harder to do the ice breaking. It becomes harder for people to be able to get to know each other and connect. And it takes longer for that to be there. So a lot of participants are a bit put off by having to post in a discussion forum. They're quite happy to go and read what other people have written, but they don't want to put something there themselves. Other participants are really not confident in speaking in a big Zoom group, you know, if you've got a big sort of online drop-in live aspect to it. And that then takes quite a bit of time of people to get to know each other, become more familiar. What I've noticed is where you have courses where you get a couple of people at the beginning who are really warm in their introductions. This is on the discussion forum. So they are open it up in a really nice, warm way, and they start talking to each other and they then bring other participants into the dialogue. And once it gets going, it can be really, really amazing. But I do think there is the online aspect of it in relation to dialogue. It does pose challenges initially. The other thing I want to say actually is that when we're looking at online and massive and international like scope, actually the asynchronous has challenges, but the synchronous also has challenges because it's virtually impossible to find a time where everyone across the globe could make it to a live session. So then you've got the option of either having different timings and different days, and then there's a lack of consistency, or you stick with some time and then there's particular time zones that can't access the live session. So there are a number of challenges that just emerge just by it being online that I you know, you can mitigate for, but they're there. So as well as the positives, it's quite important to sort of like maybe acknowledge those.
How do you mitigate for those challenges in asynchronous dialogue across time zones? Are there ways to make sure it doesn't hinder the depth of dialogue and instead promotes ongoing thoughtful exchanges?
Yeah, so it's, as I said, that it can work really well if people have the confidence and the trust is there that what they're going to say is going to be accepted and taken on. And I do feel that perhaps part of the retention issue is when people don't necessarily, they feel like they're coming into a dialogue and they're not sure if they're able to participate, or they just want to observe from a distance. Like, I mean, I think it's fairly notable that we haven't had questions, like we said at the beginning, and to the audience, that we want to engage with the audience. But people probably are quite reluctant to sort of put themselves out there and be the first person to raise that question. I think that in terms of mitigating for it, it's you try and have a warm live event. You try and set some tone at the beginning of like we have a section, like a pre-course section, like an induction section. And you try, actually, the other thing that I find did work is when the facilitator goes in and starts making comments on the discussion forum, then things get moving. and raising further questions and so on. But I guess my point is that there is a challenge there because it's online. And yeah, I haven't quite cracked the nut of exactly how to fix all of it.
Thank
I
you for
would
that
just
call to action to our audience. They're all very nice panelists and they enjoy your questions. So please go ahead and submit them. Sorry, Meaghan, go on.
Oh no, yeah, no, we definitely invite questions, and thank you, Gonzalo, for starting us off there. But yeah, no, just to add in terms of sort of how we mitigated it, one big thing was to make the discussion forum exercises reflective. And so then they can be contextualized to a wide range of contexts and practices. So there, you know what I mean? We have that relevance piece. And then that reflective element really helped to connect the theory with practice as well. So in terms of our specific content, that was really useful as a tool for us to use. And then the other thing is just like having features where you can like posts and everything. And, you know, something that we'll mention for the course piece and something that, you know, was already sort of touched on was it's always the pedagogy first, the technology after, right? And so for us, we wanted to use a dialogic approach. Part of that is a big part of that, a huge part of that is setting a culture for dialogic exchange, right? And ensuring that there's a culture, like Farah said, of trust. What we didn't do, which is something that I would recommend every course does, is set ground rules. So which is to say quite explicitly, and we did this sort of through like the community rules that you check when you sign up for the forum, but to say explicitly, you know, all opinions are welcomed, but have to be respectful, you know, and you develop that list with the participants. So maybe even in the first session, you say, okay, let's all of us together create a list of ground rules for how we want to exchange our ideas and build on those from others. And then the other thing is to use other dialogic approaches like talking points. So you could say something a bit controversial and ask people to respond to it on the forum. And that tends to get a little bit more of a response. And I really found that as the weeks progressed, the responses to questions were bigger, more impassioned. They were, you know, and they were responding to others more. And so it did really ramp up. And I think it was quite successful as a forum. We'll actually be analyzing it for future research, but yeah, so just additional sort of tips and tricks that worked for us.
Thank you. And we do have a question from Mohammed. So he is wondering about the role of AI tools in facilitating personalized and interactive dialogue among MOOC takers. So we've skirted around AI and we've briefly mentioned chatbots, but maybe you can explore that in this online context. What is the role of AI in these systems now?
Can I start, Kevin?
Yes, please.
Because at Open University, what we are doing, we are piloting creating content with AI, and it's OU developed AI. And we are getting to good results. We are also created a chatbot because you may know that OU has the largest number of students with disability. So we have to address accessibility of content at a very high level and for different types of disability. And again, that project has got quite a good number of internal and external funding. And I want to say, in answer to Mohammed's question, I have a feel, you know, at the beginning, I showed you the trend. And I think once people in education click with what AI is capable of reliably doing, we're going to see a kind of increased pike in different aspects of development in MOOC. And one of them, I think that the problem of engagement, because sometimes the numbers are large, facilitators can't respond to every single person. Some of the answers can be automated, like welcoming everyone, or directing people to different resources, addressing the accessibility issues, and also producing learning analytics for this person is likely, you know, predictive learning analytics that this person is likely to drop, and have some action in place for people who are close to drop. And I have a feeling that AI will have a role once we know how we can trust AI and its capabilities and its reliability. But that was a very good question, and I'm looking at that space, and I think in a year or so it will develop.
Thank you. Meaghan or Farah, do you have any thoughts on AI and MOOCs?
I have huge hope for it, but the main thing is something that I've already said, which is pedagogy first, technology after, right? And so it needs to be created, and like the functionality there needs to be developed with the pedagogy in mind. If, for example, if it's dialogic, which I recommend that it be, it needs to have those fundamental principles guiding how it functions, right? To ensure that it's not guided by the functionality just on its own. So that would just be the main thing, that all too often we've seen technology be developed that isn't guided by pedagogy, right? Educational technology, I mean. And so, and also following I really like the digital principles, or the principles for digital development, sorry. And so any sort of design that it's designed with the user scalability in mind, these kinds of things. And so I think with all of those in place, there's a huge hope for it alleviating a lot of the administrative pressures from facilitating online courses like this, like the amount of time that I spent on things that, you know, AI could do in a second. So it does give me huge hope that you would be able to really scale and to do more, you know, but and to create a lot more independent like pathways for success. Yeah, I'm quite interested. I think there needs to be some PhDs done on this in the future.
I mean, I do want to sort of flag up one of the big concerns about AI, and even I mean it's good to hear that, Fereshte, that it's an OU developed AI that you're using, but AIs are only, they are replicating all the kind of they're being fed whatever data they're being fed. That's what they're going to that's what's going to come out. And what that means is that you're perpetuating some of the injustices, the Eurocentrism, the like kind of the problems that there are with knowledge. And so if we're looking at, as educators, trying to move forward with and use these tools to have a different world, to try and envisage a bit more social justice, a bit more inclusion, then it does need to be at the knowledge level as well. Is that what knowledge is valued, what knowledge is taken seriously, and the problem is that because AI is not being fed with anything other than what is mainstream, then mainstream knowledge is perpetuated. Eurocentric knowledge is perpetuated, and that is a big problem, I think, when we're talking about educational dialogue, because surely we want to have dialogue across cultures, dialogue across a range of epistemologies and worldviews, as opposed to just within what dominates.
Thank you.
Totally, yeah.
We should move on to C now, to course, and Gonzalo has submitted a question that is a great transition to this. So Gonzalo points out that in terms of openness and accessibility, free of charge is important in low-income distant countries. And that open aspect means that completion of the course is not guaranteed. So that raises some questions that we came against when we were discussing this a couple of days ago. Do you need to redefine what a course is? What becomes a course when you don't necessarily have high completion rates?
I think, Kevin, that's the problem. We are using the definitions that are for normal formal education. Completion rate for a credit-bearing course makes sense. You need to pass this assignment to get this number of credit to get a degree. But when we have an open course, which is often non-credit bearing, and we are saying it's open and you can engage with whatever you want, it's your learning, you personalize it, then completion rate, to be honest, doesn't make any sense. I was trying to learn how to do corpus analysis. I went to University of Lancaster MOOC, engaged with just one MOOC, got what I want, and came out. I didn't complete the course. I still learned. I felt my learning was complete, and it served the purpose I wanted. So when people say completion rate about MOOCs, I said, we need to rethink about the terminology that we are using, and probably have a more flexible mindset about some of the terminology. So if learning objective for that person has happened, then completing a course is not really a question. If the person wanted to learn something, learned it, then the job is done.
Do you think not just a rethink in terminology, but that the entire approach is required? Is it a mistake to be trying to make these derivatives of formal classroom environments?
Yes, that's been a problem, and there are different articles about this, you know, completion rate engagement. Just imagine with 4,000 on a MOOC, how the facilitator, we had 10 facilitators and they had a rota. There is no way. So again, when it comes to engagement, do we define the engagement as the number of clicks, number of visits, number of discussion posts? And I think for the purpose of MOOCs, first, it's quite difficult to have a general definition that cover all types of MOOCs. And second, depending on that purpose, for example, some institutions develop MOOC in order to show the impact of their projects. It's educational, but not necessarily learning in that sense. It's learning for a specific group. And again, engagement, completion rate, and those terminology have to be defined for that specific context. At least that is what I think.
I really agree with that assessment of it. Yeah, no, I don't think it can be replicated from, you know, and I think that was commonly the problem, that if you're trying to create an online version of an in-person university course, it's not, it doesn't work out like that in practice. And as part of what we looked at and how we sort of monitored and evaluated the engagement from our course, we were able to capture some of the voices of the sort of the inactive participant, which was really interesting in terms of the level of impact that they got out of the course content, and how they described their participation in these types of courses through, you know, and it was even different between courses for the same person. So they might be a bit more active in one course depending on their objectives for that course. But the really important part about that was their own agency in deciding that. So they, you know, come with a set of aims for a course. We all do. And then depending on those aims, that's what they took from it. And that was the biggest indicator of what they took, which is what they came in to want to take. And so I think that setting courses up to recognize that a bit more would do a better job for those participants. And then we can start to create better pathways to sort of elicit you know, data on their experience and their levels of engagement. But that was a big finding for us, that, you know, and then there's like the in and out participant. And like I said, all of the content was open. You didn't have to register. So we only just had website sort of analytics to go by. But yeah, so it was rather interesting from that perspective. But yeah, Farah, I'll let you jump in.
Yeah, I think you guys have raised some really important points. I think that, I mean, ultimately it comes down to what your objectives and what you're trying to do. Okay, so all the points that, like Fereshte, you're making, like, you were very clear what you needed from that course, and you took what you needed from it. And I think that it's a case of like, I guess what for me, what's kind of like going around my head as I'm listening to you talk is ultimately what are these courses for, and how are people accessing them? Because there can be such a multiple different range of things. Completion might be important in that Gonzalo's original question of when people don't put something forward from their own side, sometimes it's easy to forget about it. Whereas if they have to pay something, even if it's a nominal fee, then they're more likely to engage because they feel like they put something into it and they need to continue with that. Whether them then going through it is going to impact and change and be transformative for them or not, I don't think it's necessarily one way or the other. Like the whole thing with MOOCs and with dialogue and so on, it's so contextual. It's so dependent upon that individual, upon what they want to do. And we can sit there with our objectives and what we're trying to achieve and think about whether the completion is important to us or not. But ultimately, I don't think there's much that's necessarily within our control regarding that. So yeah, I don't really have anything direct to say about it.
We have a direct question from Valerie on this topic, and she asks, are we then saying that MOOCs have evolved into a self-directed tool of differentiation?
Right, that's an excellent question. I don't want to say that yes, MOOCs have, but what I do want to say is that certainly the work that I've been engaged in, I feel that it is a little bit of that is going on. And that's certainly going on where people are doing it in an individual capacity, where you have like a group of people, for like in our case, usually like a school with a facilitator, then it's a very different sort of ball game, it's a very different kind of setup. But certainly where you're offering courses and there isn't a fixed accreditation with it, and it really is about professional development, and whether somebody wants to do that for themselves, then really, yeah, it is about what they do and what they do and don't want to do with it. Some people want the certificate, so they want to have ticked all the boxes. And other people like Fereshte are not that bothered by that. So, and they will drop in and out and do what's relevant to them, which I don't think that's any of it's a problem. I think it's, you know, whatever works for people. But I think for us as MOOC designers or course designers, it is a bit of a problem because you can't cater for everyone. So I guess, as I said, it's down to the objective. What are you trying to achieve? And you as a course designer need to apply your design principles and set what your goals are and try and achieve that. And then ultimately you'll find out by how many people participate, whether that's something that people are interested in.
And I would just add, being very clear in the objectives of the specific course up front. Like, so the 3 courses in our series were all very different. And so in response to your question, Valerie, I would say only one of those really was around, would be a bit more self-directed, but the others wanted, like, for example, one is leading a practitioner through the process of reflective inquiry. And so it did require the full, unless you're just going back in to just get a couple resources for how to, you know, collect data, it did require the full participation. And then the other one is around, you know, facilitators would have their colleagues go through that course together as a group. So it functioned differently. And so it was really important for us to be very upfront about what the course aimed to do and how it could be used and who it was for. But I guess what we're saying is that MOOCs isn't just one thing. It's been, you know what I mean? We can broaden it and take bits, redefine it to fit for, you know, a bit better for purpose.
We have a more general but practical question from Gonzalo, who is curious about the resources required in order to create a MOOC. So whether those are financial resources or the time spent. I know, Meaghan, that you did it as part of your doctoral research. Can you discuss what level of effort is required to create these MOOCs?
Is it 6 years of effort? No. Yeah, no, a lot. So there's a lot that goes in, but I will say that I received funding from both the faculty and my college to for technology purposes, right? And I didn't use any of it. I used it all for the sort of the participation side of things. And that's because I used all open access tools. So for example, Course in a Box, I filmed everything on my own like phone and everything. And so I was able to actually do this for free, however, with a lot of time. So, you know, putting that into the picture, that's a resource that I have to, you know, admit that it was a significant amount of my time, and every little detail took a lot of time. But this was just for 3 sort of ad hoc MOOCs created on GitHub. So it's going to look a lot different than, you know, lectures at a university creating these courses and having to continuously reiterate depending on user feedback, right? So yeah, but I will say the costs though can be cut. Like I managed to do, like I said, everything with my own stuff and all of the coding and website development just for free because it was me.
Just to give a sense of reality, because when you're doing your PhD is your baby, you do everything for your PhD. But in reality, a 5-week MOOC cost 45 grand to be produced in a way that is presentable in key platforms like FutureLearn. And it starts from the design workshops, paying learning designers, a videographer, also getting all the videos transcribed, meeting the accessibility, etc., etc. So that's the real cost. And that's why universities started moving away from MOOCs, or they offer MOOCs, like 3 weeks of MOOCs. If you want to do more, come and do these micro-credentials. So micro-credentials are a kind of next generation of MOOCs, in sense that they are still easy to do, but you have to pay, but the payment is not a large amount of fee. It's usually a small fee, and you get credit. And then you can stack your micro-credential, and that's what we do. People do 4 micro-credential with our institute. Then they do a dissertation and they can go out with an MA in online teaching. And you know, that's the business model that universities and institutions started looking at in order to, you know, pay for that 45 grand. But another thing that we do, I mean, Open University is just for offering online courses. So, and we've been doing it for 50 years. So we get quite a lot of funding. And as a project, that is one of our aims, to have a MOOC that later we can make it accessible to everyone for free. And in some way the project fundings pay for the production.
Thank you. We are almost out of time, but we have one more question in, which is an excellent closing question for the 3 of you. What do you think is the future of MOOCs in the global North and the global South? And then if you have a chance, what teacher PD topics would be on high interest to practitioners?
Okay, so I think that I'll start off by saying that depending on how you're defining a MOOC, but certainly online courses will be a strong feature going forward in the global South and the global North, because it's just, it offers an accessibility that it enables people to participate in ways that they wouldn't have been able to previously participate. So I think that there is going to be, it's going to continue happening. Whether it will happen as it's like open, it's free, those kinds of things will shift and change. Whether it's, so the whole thing about calling it massive open online course is, I think we need to maybe move away from that and just say online course, and then some might be massive and open, some might not. But I do think that they will proliferate, and I think AI will come in. Personally, I feel that skills-based micro-credentials ones will become more of a norm, but I feel that the capacity for deeper MOOCs or deeper courses is there. In terms of teacher PD topics, I think it could be anything and everything. And really it's to do with whatever people feel is an issue at the time, or really what research is coming out that people feel that they want to share, because a lot of the work that we've been involved in is coming through research that's happening that we want to create impact. So then online courses are a good way of doing that. So I don't think it's possible to sort of say definitely it's going to be this or that, but it would just be what becomes concern. So well-being is a big concern at the moment. So you're seeing online courses coming out regarding that. And so it's to do with demand, is to do with what research is happening. So there's no, I mean, I think those are the kind of factors or variables that will impact how things move forward.
Yeah, I think it's really policy context as well, right? And it's an interesting challenge, I think, in designing international courses like this, where there's a lot of, varied, like enormously varied policy contexts in play for teachers in terms of what the focus areas are for their specific locations. Even their like school boards, right, might have slightly different priorities and talk about different things. And so I think that perhaps, what might be sort of more common is, and I will say educational dialogue does like sort of bridge a few areas, and it brings it, like our course brought it back to the theory. And so I see a future for that. I don't know if it'll happen, but I would love that to happen as well, and to have more opportunities to reflect on theory and how it relates to practice. But yeah, I mean, I really hope that there continues to be a lot of research in this area too, in terms of how to create really effective and like meaningful experiences for a range of participants, and to that inclusivity piece, that access and equity piece, having a lot more research around who is able to access these, and how do we design it with access in mind.
And I'll add a few points very quickly because I'm conscious of time. I think MOOCs didn't die. They survived. Although they have reached that plateau and all the kind of statistics show that, I think they will continue. And probably with AI, we're going to see another pike sometime soon in the next year or so. I think topic-wise, when it comes to teachers' professional development, the focus will shift to really critical topics and raising teachers' awareness about climate education, social justice, energy education, and also AI, how to use AI for education. And something that we usually in Global don't forget is about what's happening in MOOCs, with MOOCs in other countries. China have been using MOOCs in the past 5 years, and they are using it more and more, and the research around that is expanding. But the thing is, because it is not in English, we really don't know what's happening, and we shouldn't forget that a big group of users are in China, are Chinese MOOC providers. So I think we need to get out of our bubble and see what is happening globally, and not necessarily in the UK and in Europe.
Well, thank you all. That is all that we have time for today. So I want to thank you, Meaghan, Fereshte, and Farah, for sharing your experience and expertise today, and to our audience for such great questions. We've had the opportunity to explore both the strengths of MOOCs in creating accessible, dialogue-rich learning environments in very creative ways, but we also looked at how we might need to rethink the terminology as well as the approach to better serve such diversity of learners. So you can see on the screen here, you have an opportunity to learn more about each of the organizations represented here today. And if you want to explore further, feel free to reach out to DEFI and we can put you in touch with any of our panelists.